Canyon County Paramedics, how many times is there no ambulance available? And I think for this last month, there were 18 times in that month where there were no ambulance available.
Chief Stowell, how are you?
I'm doing really well today, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And again, you and I connected a couple months ago, and then a lot was going on, and we circled back. You are the chief of Canyon County EMS Services, which is distinct from EMS Fire Service. You are in charge of the ambulances and the paramedics. You have a board that is made up of the Canyon County commissioners, but you are not part of the Canyon County taxing district. You have your independent district.
Correct.
Canyon County's growing like crazy.
Oh, my word, yeah.
The need for additional service and funding for that service is growing. You are trying to do a levy override, not just a base levy, but a levy override.
Right.
There's a lot here. Talk to me about this.
So yes, you're definitely correct. We are Canyon County Paramedics. Officially, we're Canyon County Ambulance District because we are a taxing district. We are not part of the county. That's super confusing for people, especially since we're called Canyon County Paramedics. We are a separate taxing district from the county. So we're like, say, the highway district, mosquito abatement district. We collect taxes separately for the ambulance district, for the ambulance services throughout the county. It's also confusing because we do have the 3 Canyon County commissioners sit as the ambulance district board. They do ambulance district business when we're having a district meeting for us. But when they're in the county, they have county business. So it is confusing for people who we are. We are separate. It means that our funding does not mix. So the Canyon County fund balance is not the ambulance district fund balance. So it really confuses people when they start saying, why are you having trouble with funding? You know, we know what the county is. We know the county's fund balance. We know the revenues that they bring in. Well, we're separate. And that does create a challenge. Like you said, too, the other thing that people get a little bit confused on is we're not part of the fire department. And I know in a lot of other parts of the country, and like where people come from, well, they think we're part of the fire service. And so when we go out to educate people, when we're trying to go for a levy override, they start lumping us in the fire department. And so they struggle with how are you funded and why don't you have the funding and why are you not part of the fire service? So it is definitely very confusing.
Very embarrassingly, and a horrible admission. When I was trying to get a hold of you, because somebody was like, oh, there's an EMS crisis in Canyon County. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I instantly try to get a hold of fire people. Fire people are on the phone and very kindly were explaining, because, Canyon County Fire has their own issues and they're very interesting and complex. So I'm on the phone for half an hour with this guy and he's explaining how it's like, well, there are 2 different things and we're like kind of merged and blah, blah. And the whole time I'm wondering, like, wait, I thought there was like a funding problem. He's like, no. You're thinking about the EMS, like paramedics. I'm like, oh my God, I'm just it. Like every time I say it, it's like, I'm an idiot. Every time I get on the phone, I'm like, you know so little. So
it is hard to keep track of, and it just is. And I get it. I understand that people would be confused. It doesn't mean they're stupid. They're just not realizing how we are funded.
Sure.
Fire services are usually, I think, around 97% funded by taxes. We're funded about 30% funded by taxes. And the other part is fee for service. And that's why if you take a ride in the ambulance, you're going to get a bill. If you have a house fire and the fire department comes out, they're not going to bill you for putting that fire out because they're funded mainly by taxes. You are paying for that service already. We're only funded about 30% funded by taxes. So that's where the big difference is. And the rest of it is fee for service. So they both come with their limitations. The first one, property tax, and that's the one that really gets people to go in because everybody knows what property taxes are. They don't want their property taxes to go up. And so we do have caps, just like the counties, just like the cities, just like other taxing districts. You can only grow by a certain percent. And I know you've had Speaker Moyle on here that explains some of that. So we can only take a maximum from our property tax base budget. You can only grow 3%. You can take the new construction and you can take foregone. And so for the ambulance district, just as an example, between fiscal year 2024 and 2025, we took the maximum that we could by about $188,000. That's it. That doesn't pay for anything. When an ambulance fully stocked, ready to go, is $500,000. When a station is $2 million. When staffing, we need several $1 million. If we take the maximum amount of property taxes, new construction, and you're only growing by that amount, well, you're never going to get caught up. You're never going to get ahead. And so that's a big hindrance.
I'm sorry to interrupt. A couple questions, just real fast. So 30% comes from the taxing district, and then the other 70% comes from pay for service. Now, that 70%, is that billed directly to consumer, and most people cover that in insurance, or is that literally billed directly to consumer and not classically something that insurance pays?
So definitely both. People do get a bill, and it does go to your insurance, and that's the other problem we have with the fee for service part. For Canyon County Paramedics, and I think probably the same for Ada and other taxing districts, ambulance services, about 70% of that fee-for-service demographic that we transport falls within the Medicare fee schedule, and that can be super confusing. CMS, which is the Centers for Medicaid Services, Medicare and Medicaid Services, they set the rate for anyone that has Medicare. And as an example, and I'll just make it even numbers, let's say we come out for a chest pain call, put the monitor on, start an IV, give you medication. Maybe that bill is about $1,000. Maybe your copay, if you have Medicare, your copay might be $100. Medicare will say, well, we're going to pay $400 of that $1,000 bill. You're going to write the rest off. Not write off to collections, not somebody else going to come after that. We can't go for it. That's a mandated write-off. So out of a $1,000 bill, mandatory write-offs is $500. How are you ever going to catch up with that, especially when 70% of your demographic fits within that fee schedule? That's a huge problem. That came around, I think, around 2002, and it's caused different ambulance services across the country to go out of business. That's a huge problem. So when you have the two main funding sources that have caps on them, the property tax cap and all those Medicare write-offs, how are you ever going to get caught up?
And when you're saying the 70% of the population is under that Medicare theoretically fee schedule,
70% of the patients that we transport.
I was going to say like that it's got to be even if the older people that you take care of, even if they're a smaller portion of the population, they have to be the bulk of your calls. So it's 70% of your calls are people that fall under that funding umbrella, which caps the amount that you can collect. Not just that they'll reimburse you when you go after the patient for the rest of it. I don't mean that in the malicious manner, but like you ask the patient to cover the rest of it. It's no. You only get $500. You're going to eat this one.
Yep. You're going to eat the rest of that bill. And so that is a majority. And if we think about the baby boomer generation that's going to hit that higher age bracket, and there's nothing wrong with that generation, any of us, when we get older, we become higher consumers of healthcare. Right. And so as we have that huge generation, excuse me, and sorry, one of the hospitals put out some data recently that talked about here in the Treasure Valley, when that boom hits here over the next 10 years, it's staggering how much of our population is going to be that higher healthcare consumer. Right. So our fee for service that falls within the Medicare group is going to get even larger over the next 10 years. So it's going to be even a bigger hindrance for the ambulance service as we transport those patients.
Now, and not understood that it's a larger percent that are older people, but that's not to say that this is a giveaway to the elderly, right? Like for instance, I consider myself a reasonably healthy person and, I can run fast. I can do a lot of jujitsu. Like I'm fine. I think I have low blood pressure. I have no idea. It doesn't matter. But when I was 38, sitting at home, it was like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm eating an apple, right? I'm about to get ready to go start some tutoring. I got this wave of kind of vertigo. I'm like, oh, that's weird. And it happens. You get up and whatever. Yeah. And then a minute later, I got like another wave. I'm like, that's interesting. And I don't want to freak out my wife. So I kind of sit on the floor and I play with like my dog and I'm going to go take a shower. What I really do is when I leave the kitchen, I grab my phone and immediately look up prolonged vertigo. Yeah. Within 5 minutes, I'm on the side of my bed, lying on my bed, trying to reset the crystal in my ear and doing like these weird exercises. And the world is becoming more and more unbalanced. As within another 5 minutes, I'm violently vomiting on my bathroom floor, incapable of moving. And I had a bout of like Meniere's disease. I can't. And I was perfectly healthy. But what had happened, it's at least my understanding, is the crystal in your ear with the fluid that establishes your balance for the world, that got screwed up, essentially like really bad seasickness. I lost my capacity to balance and we had to call the ambulance. I thought I was dying. I was like, this is it. You had a good run.
Yeah.
Like say goodbye to your kids. Yeah, you tried. You tried. You did everything.
You did your part.
Right? You did your part. And I had to take an ambulance ride and we had to go through all of this. Like, I'm not dying. I don't have a tumor. It was literally just this thing. So now I walk around with, I have these industrial strength seasickness pills. But this was something where when we called, we needed the ambulance. Like it was over, man. Like they had to drag me on the floor out because I couldn't even crawl. Yeah. And so ambulance services, again, I know there's a sentiment to some degree. It's like, well, this is just for old elderly people. It's like, dude, if that ambulance service was a half an hour for me, that would have been like the crisis in my life would have been substantial.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. We, have everything from childbirth to the elderly too, and everything in between. So are they higher consumers as you get older? However, traffic accidents happen every day.
Right.
It happens to all age groups. So yeah, the ambulance service is very much needed, no matter your age. It just is. But that Medicare fee schedule is what really hinders us. It's just that, boy, that's a lot of write-offs.
That's a lot of write-offs. And then the other piece of what you were saying that, hey, look, a fully stocked ambulance, the physical vehicle, $500,000, and you're talking buildings to store them. I was educated to some degree on the budgeting struggles of fire and EMS versus police. Like, look, if you want another police officer, we can get you another police officer. But if you want another fire department, right, or you want another firefighter, you're only going to have so many firefighters that you can jam onto one truck. And then you need another truck, and then you need another building to store the truck. So there's a threshold of funding that it's not just, going upstairs. It's literally like leaps and bounds. And you're like, boom, we have to do this. We have to overcome this funding threshold before we can even engage additional services.
Exactly. And it's super expensive. And like we were talking earlier, Canyon County Paramedics has not built a station in 20 years. In 20 years, we have not built a station. We've co-housed, which is helpful. We've put an ambulance in the Middleton Fire Station and one of the Nampa Fire Station out in Wilder. And that does help. That helps the taxpayers by not building a whole separate building. But fire stations don't always end up exactly where you need an ambulance to be either. So there are times we need to build. We've also co-housed, or we've housed in hospital-built stations, which is great. However, that's one of the issues we're having right now, which is why we're going for that levy override as well. Mercy Medical Center is a hospital in South Nampa. When I started 20 years ago, we were housed above the morgue in the hospital building. And as time went on, they needed to expand their ER, and so they ended up building a small station for us to house us in. They got bought out by St. Al's and St. Al's grew. And a couple years ago, St. Alphonsus sold that old hospital campus. Well, that's where our station is at. We don't own that station. The hospital is just allowing us to be in there. That station is going to get torn down. A private developer now owns that station, and they're really good to work with. They're letting us stay there. But at some time in the next year or two, that station is getting torn down. That's the second busiest station in the county for us. Second busiest. That ambulance is gone all the time. We have $0 to put towards rebuilding that station. So if that company were to say, hey, Canyon County Paramedics, you need to vacate in 2 months, because we're ready. They're building on the site. If you've been out there, thankfully they're starting on the north. Our station's on the south, so they'll get closer. What are we going to do when we lose that station? It's the second busiest station down there, and we have no funds to replace that station. We just don't.
Okay. Now, I think anybody who would conceptualize, hey, you haven't built anything in 20 years, we compare 2004 to 2024, I couldn't even imagine the population growth in this area. That's incredible. So there, it appears, ignorant guy, I would get on your page with like, okay, so you need funding, right? You need more funding. But what's the levy versus the levy override, which is what you're asking for?
Great.
So tell me what the original levy was and why that needs to be overridden.
Okay, sure. So we're like every other taxing district. We do have a levy. And currently right now, I think it's around $10 per 100,000 of net taxable value. If you're a homeowner, it's property taxes. Sure. So I think for fiscal 25, we're going to levy around $3.7 million of property taxes. And we can only grow that by 3%. So by next year, we can tack on 3% on top of that. If we want to get additional funds, which we have to do, we have no other way to get additional funds, we have to override that amount. And so instead of doing $10 per $100,000, net taxable value, we want to move that up by $14. So you would be paying $24 per $100,000 in net taxable value. Well, the legislature, and I understand, they said, well, if you want to do that, you have to go to the voters. It isn't something we can just do on our own. You have to go out to the voters. It needs a supermajority, which is super hard to do. You have to get a supermajority for the taxpayers to vote and say, yes, we will agree to you doing that. So we're overriding the current levy. And it is super confusing for people. They understand what bonds are. You don't hear about levies as often. You definitely don't hear about levy overrides. Prior to that first levy that failed, I went out and met with almost all the city councils throughout Canyon County. And I can't tell you how many times even city council members would say, what are you overriding? Because it's not something people think about every day. And so it was a huge education piece just to educate people even on what is a levy override, not even why we need one, but what is it? And then on top of that, who are we? So I spent a lot of my time just educating people on, we're not part of the county, we're a taxing district, a levy override is this. And that eats up a lot of time to where you almost can't even get into, well, this is why
we need
exactly.
Right.
And I knew that going in. I'm not naive. People just, they see an ambulance going down the road and they might think like, oh, there's Canyon County paramedics. They're not going to think about how are they funded.
Right.
And I understand that.
And again, you've got to walk me through this. Yeah. So there are other taxing districts, like for instance, my school district, West Ada School District. They get funding from, if say they have a levy or a bond, as well as funding from other sources, right? Like, people are going to hate me. I'm going to screw this up, but they get funding from the state in some capacity. Sure. And then they say, hey, we're growing faster, or we need this additional levy. But for you guys, that's not the case. The levy is your funding. And so the levy essentially has been established through the entire time of your existence, which is funding roughly 30% of your service, and the other 70% comes from the consumer.
Yeah. And there's about 5%, left over. We do get a small amount of some state shared revenues, very small for us. And when you go register your vehicle, there's a small EMS, there's a registration fee for your license. But that's it. The main two sources are the property taxes and the fee for service. And there's nothing we can do about fee for service as far as CMS goes. We could raise our rate to $2,000 per chest pain call. CMS is still going to say, and like I said, I'm going to use round numbers. They're still going to say, whatever the copay is for the patient, here's $400. Now you're going to write off almost $2,000. So it doesn't matter. They set the rules, and you got to play by those rules. And so the only thing that we can try to do is go to the voters, tell them that story, put it in their lap and say, what level of service do you want to have for an ambulance service? And they'll vote on that. And we went for our original override in May, and we would need 66 2/3% vote to pass. We got a 60% no. We almost got a supermajority against instead of for. Yeah. And so that was a pretty big, going for tax increases, you in the back of your mind, you do know, okay, this has a high probability of failing just because it's raising property taxes. We still think it can pass with the right amount of education, but you kind of know that it has a chance of failing. It surprised me of how largely it failed. Like the 60% part did surprise us. And it wasn't anti-ambulance. All of those failed, sure. Whether it was, the fire district, look at Caldwell School District, theirs failed, shut down a school.
Yeah, right.
We are literally, with that first override, we wanted to build 2 stations. We need to build the one in South Nampa that we're losing. We need to build one in Caldwell because we only have 2 in Caldwell. We wanted to put on 2 more ambulances and add 12 staff members. And so with that, we heard a lot of, it's too much. It's permanent. You don't need the funds. You're a private service, and just all that information. And so we went back to the drawing board when it failed like that and said, okay, what can we do? Can we reduce it? And so we are asking for less. Originally, it was $7.9 million. We're going to ask for $5.8 million this way. But we changed our deployment and we changed the level of service. Mainly, your highest call volumes are during the day. That just makes sense. More people out and about doing things. So call volume is going to be higher during the day. But we are staffed 24 hours a day, having the same amount of people on during the day as at night. And so we looked at that and said, okay, how could we maybe shift some of that night coverage to the day half when you've got more call volume? And so we did. We went to 14 of our staff members and said, instead of working 2 24-hour shifts, you're now going to work 12, 12, 24. It moved some of that staffing to the day. And when you start overlapping, it takes a little bit less staff. Is it what we wanted to do? No, it reduces our level of service. But I don't think with a 60% no on $7.9 million, we're going to get there. So how can we change our deployment and ask for less? And that's what we did. And so we'll see if the public wants to support that level of service. Unfortunately, for fiscal 25, we had decided we only have a small fund balance. We do not have, like Speaker Moyle said, some agencies or entities, cities have a large fund balance. We don't. We started this fiscal year with about $1.3 million. It takes about $1 million to get you from October 1 to the end of January. So we have a very small one. We cannot keep using fund balance to balance our budget. So we said fiscal 25, we're not going to use fund balance. Well, in order to balance our budget, we had to cut staff. So instead of adding staff, adding a level of service for this next year, we're unfunding 4 positions, which means less amount of service to the citizens of Canyon County. But we have to balance our budget, and we don't have the funding there. And so that's part of the reason we're going for that override, is we have to get some funding to add services because we're going backwards.
Right. So when the levy that you're dealing with right now has gone up various percents since its inception, which is when you guys started, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when was the service? When was the district established?
We were created in 1977.
Okay, so 1977 they start with the levy with a certain amount, and then you have gone up in your budgeting a certain percentage of that the whole time, right?
Yes.
Be it it could be 0% all the way up to you take the new construction, you take the 3%, you take a foregone, you go up 8 or 9% in real big growth years. So what the levy override is essentially saying is, hey guys, we need to reset this base upon which we're sitting and we're growing. So instead of growing at this, you're going to go and then start growing from there. So when people are saying, hey, this is a permanent increase, you're saying, yes, we're going to actually increase the base by which we now reestablish how much we can increase, because that's the level of service that is required with the number of people moving here, with the increased need for different buildings, the increased need for different trucks, services, things of that nature.
Yep, all that. And it is because in 2001, right before I got hired, the ambulance district did run a supplemental override. That's it's not a permanent override. We picked, the former chief decided we need $1.6 million. We need to build a station in Caldwell, station Nampa, the last 2 stations that we actually built were back then. We need to add the ambulances for it and the crews to staff it. We need $1.6 million. So it was a supplemental override. It only needed simple majority, but it was only for $1.6 million. $800,000, I think, in 02, $800,000 in 03, and then it's back down to that previous levy. So that was a temporary solution. It got us 2 stations, but here we are again. And that's why we're looking for a permanent override, because we have a permanent need. If you build a station, great, your budget can go up. Build that station and it can go back down. Well, staffing doesn't ever go away.
I was gonna say, isn't that like? And listen, I don't mean to criticize at all, and I don't know anything about this, but isn't that if you're like, hey, I got this $1.6 million to build these 2 stations, good for me and good for everybody here.
Yeah.
Well, not good for everybody if now it costs you $500,000 additional per year to staff those stations.
Exactly. Staffing never goes away unless you hire them the one year, you get a supplemental override, and then fire them the next, because your budget's not going to go down with staffing.
Yeah, but that even if you did that, then why build the stations?
Yeah.
The increased need necessitates not just a one-time capital improvement cost, but you need that repetitive funding so that you have somebody driving the dang ambulance.
Yeah, exactly. And so for our permanent override, originally for that May vote, or for the May vote, we were going to rebuild the station down South Nampa. Still need that. Like, that station's going away. We have to rebuild that. We need to build that station in Caldwell. We're still asking for that. We were going to add 12 additional staff. Well, now we're going to only add 7 additional staff. So it has reduced that need, but it is a permanent need. And I had a lot of discussions. I mean, I met with, like I said, almost every city council, fire district boards, Kiwanis, Lions, the 5C, Concerned Citizens Group of Canyon County, and got a lot of feedback like, why do you need a permanent override? Well, we're just naming those first 4 issues that we need to address. one, that staffing is permanent. Well, we need to add more staff as years go along. The other thing, we can't list all 20 items that we might have. Our cardiac monitors right now are 10 years old. Our cardiac, 10 years old. They don't last forever. Our ventilators, 10 years old. Those cardiac monitors will probably be almost $1 million to replace. We're already at 10 years. We should be replacing them. So that permanent override is going to be addressing those future needs as well. So if we did a supplemental to rebuild those 2 stations and it drops back down, how are we going to fund those cardiac monitors? Because that 3% increase on property tax, $188,000 is not going to get you. The CMS holdback, that's not going to get you there. So that's why we're asking to override that levy. Is that for us, that's the only way we can see to get that extra funding to meet the current need, let alone grow at all. We have no ability. We have a 10-year capital improvement plan. We have no ability to fund any of it. Not a single item on that plan can we fund right now.
This is a wild thing because you mentioned it briefly that you were like, look, they're not, people that voted against this are not anti-ambulance.
Mm-mm.
Everything failed, right?
Yep.
And I actually spoke with a city council person this morning because I was having you come in and
Yep.
like, I should do more research, but I just, my brain can only,
there's only so much time in a day.
And the city councilman also said, look, people have funding fatigue. They have taxing fatigue. And a lot of them are just voting no to a lot of things. Now you have some degree, some number of people that vote no to all funding, some number of people that, vote no because they think maybe you haven't done everything you could to stretch your budget, I'm sure. And then you have, roughly 40% of people who were on board with it and did want to have it. But the emphasis is that, look, there's an overwhelming sense that people are frustrated about their property taxes. And I get that. And by the way, I don't live in Canyon County, so it's not like, I'm advocating because I want enhanced service from you. But I get the idea that it's, hey, I don't want to spend any more on my property tax. I get that I'm part of the problem. Let me be clear. I'm the issue. People like me moving in here. I get that. But at the same time, people also like this community and they like it for very specific reasons, that the quality of life is good, that the services are good, that it's not, this horrendous, terrible situation where some people moved from.
Exactly.
But it can turn into that. Like we could turn into 30-minute wait times and whatnot. Just a question to quantify this. What is your call for service average time now versus what it theoretically will be if this doesn't pass?
I don't have that data right in front of me, and I've thought about so many numbers, I might have lost a little bit of track, but we've lost about 2 minutes in response time over the last 5 years. So if we were at 7 minutes, let's say, we're up to 9 minutes. So we've lost that amount of response time just because we have not been able to add units as the growth. We've had, I think, a 20% growth over the last 5 years. We have not grown our level of service like that. We've actually, like I said, for next year, we're actually decreasing it slightly. And so thankfully, we work really well together. With the fire service, we're a team. We respond on medical calls together. So hopefully if we're taking longer, there is, a fire engine going on that call too. They can get there until we get there. But man, our response times are going up, and that is critical. It isn't critical on every call. There's plenty of calls that are non-emergent, trip, fell, hurt my knee, need to go to the hospital. But on the time sensitive ones, the heart attacks, the strokes, the major trauma, every minute counts. And we can, the fire service and the Canyon County Paramedics, we can do what we're trained to do on scene, but ultimately they need definitive care, and definitive care is at the hospital with a physician. They need transport to the hospital. They don't need us on scene for a half hour, 45 minutes doing our skills, which is great. They need to be at the hospital. And that's our role in Canyon County, is to transport patients to the hospital.
Yeah, that's a big and again, it's the minutes that tick by. I had recently was fortunate to have Chief Hessing from Stowell Police Department in here, and they're doing a really, really good job with response time. I think he was saying that the average call for service response time is like 2.5 minutes.
Awesome.
And you think about that, it's like, if you're in a crisis, like if somebody's breaking into your house, the police are there, man. Like they are, boom, they're on it, and that's great. But to conceptualize going from 2.5 minutes where I'm like, this is an emergency, somebody's breaking into my house, versus, oh my God, this person's dying, and you're going to wait almost 4 times as long as the police showing up. it's almost like, can you just get a police car here and throw them in the back and take them to the hospital? Because like, if we're waiting an extra 7 minutes after that.
Yeah.
Man, that's a lot to think about that jump.
That is a lot. And people don't realize that until you call 911. And, we keep track of our response times. We also keep track of what we call level 0. And we started putting this information out on Facebook because people are asking, like, what are your stats? How many calls are you going on? And we started tracking our level 0. And level 0 is when there are no ambulances available. So in Canyon County Paramedics, how many times is there no ambulance available? And I think for this last month, there were 18 times in that month where there were no ambulance available. Every one of them is on a call. Doesn't mean they're on scene. They're either on scene, headed to a scene, headed to the hospital. But that's kind of scary to think about, that there's no ambulance available for a call. And that's only going to increase unless we can increase our level of service to provide more ambulances so we don't run out of them.
Now, when you say level 0, no ambulances available, does this mean that 18 times somebody called and there was nobody available? Or does that mean 18 times you're like, hey, if somebody calls right now, we're going to say, yeah, we'll be there when we get there?
Yeah, it depends. There are times when, yes, there are calls, we call it calls pending, but that's just an overall, there's no ambulance available. And thankfully if we're headed to the hospital and, dispatch lets them know, like, there's no units available, well, then we try to turn over at the hospital quicker. We're not going to just sit around and visit with the doctors about previous patients. We know, and we let the hospital know we've got to get out of it
coming
quick.
in hot.
Yep, hot. That would be a good way to put it, is we need to turn over and get back out there sooner. So I don't think people could even clue in that. What do you mean there's no ambulance available? Like, I would have never thought of that previously. Like, there's got to be enough ambulances in a county, in a city to cover, but well, we do run out of them.
Gotcha.
And we've got to correct that, and it's going to come with funding. And I hate to say it, it's going to come with taxes where we're at right now.
Unless somebody wants to donate.
Yeah. Yes. And so I don't see that happening, but
that's a smaller portion of our funding.
That's a very small portion of our funding.
Yeah, because like police officers, it's like yesterday was 9/11, right? It's like fire departments, police officers, police departments. You probably didn't get a lot of like apple pies and tri-tips delivered to your stations, did you?
No,
not so much.
Not as much. And people are super helpful, and they do see us as a public service too. It is hard. Paramedicine hasn't been around as long as police and fire. Yeah. And so it is a little bit harder to think of the paramedic service, and especially not if they do lump us in with another service, then they don't separate us out and think about us. But yeah, the public's great, and they do want to get educated. It's a lot, and I know it's property taxes, and I get it. And I also get fixed income. My mom is 83. I understand that. I'm also a citizen. I know what it costs to get groceries now. Everything's going up, but we've got to provide the level of service. We just have to, and we've got to ask the voters and have them help us decide, what does that look like?
I have a very dear friend, Mackenzie Tiggs, and she runs the Raw Thoughts.
I know her dad really well.
Yeah, she's great. And I talk to her all the time. And again, shout out Mackenzie, check out the Raw Thoughts podcast, but she talks to first responders. And I interviewed her on we talk all the time, but I interviewed her on the show because she does a lot of work with EMS stuff. Yeah. And she recounted a couple times when she was on really busy shifts as a paramedic. And she was saying, she's like, literally we'd be, one really far out trip she had to take. It was like a half an hour, multi-car accident, turnover, all of these things. And they were getting the calls as she was in this ambulance. And she was saying that her partner recounted that he looked over and saw her and she was like white. Now she's pale in general, but she was like white. And they got there, they were multiple people they had to take care of. They got them back to the hospital. And so it's this big traumatic event. And the second they get the patients to the hospital, they get another call and are going out. And she emphasized that the trauma that the EMS people in particular experience with literally just running hot, just the entire shift you're going, and it's crisis every single, you get the calls where somebody hurt their knee, but the damage that she experienced just to her psyche going through this and having to deal with this. I remember hearing that and just being like, I had no idea. And I took my kid to a basketball practice that evening, and on Eagle, and traffic was really bad. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And then all of a sudden we see this ambulance bombing up the wrong side of the road, going up. And I thought about her. It's like, God, man, there might be a 23-year-old in that car who's white, trying to save somebody's life. And to imagine that person doing that for our community, making some piddly sum or working horrendous hours, and so unappreciated, because she's not a fireman. She's not a police officer. She's like the whipping boy of the emergency response system. And then to hear that you guys were struggling with funding as well, it's just, I really wanted to talk to you about it, because it's wild that we depend so heavily on you to be there when we think we're at the end. Like when I'm on my bathroom floor thinking it's over, and I'm waiting for the ambulance to show up. And then, to hear that you guys are struggling the way you are, it really hit me.
It is. And it's really hard for me as the chief to think that we're going backwards, or that we can't expand, we can't meet the growth, because people do expect that. You would expect when you call 911, an ambulance is going to show up quickly. And it's hard too. We have staff. Our turnover rate right now is super high. We pay about $14,000 less than some other agencies for paramedics. And that's comparing hourly. Some of them work more hours, like the fire department. Even Ada County Paramedics now has more hours. But when you compare hourly, so as you can imagine, like that's going to cause some turnover. If I can make that much more, especially in this economy. And so that turnover rate is also hard on the people that do stick around too. It's constantly training and having that. And it's pretty discouraging. And as a chief, it's definitely hard to think about, I don't know what else I can do. I don't have the funding, and we have funding problems. And that's just rough. We do have a plan. We have a 10-year plan, and we have no way to fund any of that. And I've been here 20 years, and it has been a struggle the entire time I've been at Canyon County Paramedics. And it's not just us. Other departments are not that far behind us. We're just closer, or at the cliff, maybe over the cliff slightly. EMS across the country is struggling. EMS across this state is struggling. We've tried legislation, and it didn't quite get through last year. Everyone knows this is a problem. We have got to figure out a way how to fund EMS better than we are right now. It's crumbling. Well, just is.
Chief, listen, we've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything we've missed?
I would say the big thing with the November election coming up is get out to vote. I know people can be super discouraged by the current presidential election, and you might think nationally, my vote doesn't count. Local elections count a lot. Get educated and get out to vote. And a prime example is Caldwell Fire Department ran a bond a year ago. It passed by 3 votes. 3 votes is nothing. Look at how close that failed. That was a local election that local votes counted. So I would just say, get educated about what's on the ballot and get out to vote.
That's beautiful. Thank you for coming in today. Thank you for what you're doing for Canyon County.
Thanks a ton. I appreciate it, Matt.